Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We will start the meeting. It's 5:30. Thank you. I'm Stephanie Stroud, the deputy member and presiding member for this evening's meeting. So I declare the ordinary council meeting of the 21st of September 2021 held in council chambers at the City of Subiaco open at 5:30 p.m. I welcome the councillors, staff, the media, members of the community. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Wadja Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and the waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. Please note this meeting is being recorded and live streamed. By being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the possibility that their image and voice may be live streamed to the public. Recordings will be made available following the meeting. Confidential sections of council meetings will not be live streamed or recorded. Attendance, apologies and leave of absence. The reason that Councillor Powell's looking a bit lonely over there is unfortunately we have a number of apologies. Apologies from Councillor Murray Rowe, Councillor David Mcmullen, Councillor Blake Phelan, Councillor Matthew Davis. Are there any other apologies this evening? It looks like the rest of us are here. And we have a leave of absence from Mayor Penny Taylor. Disclosures of interest. Are there any disclosures of interest? No, there are none. Thank you. Response to previous public questions taken on notice. There are none. Chief Executive, are you reading the conditions of entry? Thank you.
Thank you, Presiding Member and Deputy Mayor. I think I had a quick chat to all the members of the public and also for those watching on live streaming, just around that this is a meeting that's live streaming and there are no protections in terms of defamation and those sorts of things, so I'm sure we'll be good.
Thank you, CEO. We're up to agenda item number 5, public question time. There are four questions or four lots of people speaking tonight, asking us questions. I think they may all be on Subi East, but anyway, I welcome you to the lectern. Helen Leader, would you like to start off? Thank you.
Thank you. And by way of a change, this has nothing to do with the Subi East. The Mayor, who is on leave of absence until the 27th of September, has not re-nominated for election to this council and has made numerous public announcements that she is no longer interested in local government. In spite of this, I understand that at a cost of $1,200, the council has registered her to be a full delegate representing the city at the annual Walga convention, which is on this week. If the above is correct, and I apologise if it's not, please inform me why the council has paid $1,200 for the retiring and officially absent mayor to represent the city as a full delegate at the annual Walga convention, and if the council did pay, what value the city expects to receive from the attendance of the mayor at this convention, given that she will retire 18 days after her current leave of absence expires. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen, for the question and through the chair. Look, elected members may request for council to approve a leave of absence for attending council meetings. This does not prevent the elected member from fulfilling their statutory roles under the Local Government Act and representing the City of Subiaco until the office expires on the 16th of October 2021. The Walga Convention considers past as well as the future, including matters considered at the Walga Annual General Meeting, and the Mayor is a voting delegate at that Walga AGM.
Next person to pose questions is past serving Councillor Paul Clements. Would you like to come to the lectern? Thank you.
Thank you, Acting Mayor, and thank you for having us. Two questions, please. Question one, in item C7, why is the City not supplying additional options to advocate for the inclusion of 1.73 hectares of active playing fields in addition to Subiaco Oval as part of the Subiaco East Recreation Reserve that was entrusted to this council as an A-class reserve in 1904? That's the first question. Would you like the second one now? Yeah. What consultation has the City undertaken with local sporting clubs and local schools, including Subiaco Primary School, Jollymont, Perth Modern School, to see that these green spaces are appropriate for local sporting groups, and if the schools have spare capacity at the sites listed in C7? That's it.
Thank you. The Acting Director will answer your questions.
Thank you, and through Presiding Member. In response to your first question, item C7 responds to a previous council resolution that requested a report once responses were received from the Premier of Western Australia and the Chair of Development WA. This ordinary council meeting tonight is covered by the council caretaker policy, and future options for Subiaco East may be considered by the new council in the near future following the caretaker period. In response to your second question, the City has focused on finalising the agreement for Subiaco Oval with the relevant parties. With this agreement in its final stages, we can now turn our attention to liaising with the remaining schools to consider mutually beneficial options and to share active open space. This work may take some time and will be considered holistically by the City in planning for additional access to open space for our growing community. Thank you for your questions.
Okay. I understand that Sharon Williams is absent, and Mary, you are speaking on behalf of. Thank you, Mary. Mary Mcmullen. Thank you.
Thank you, Presiding Member. Okay. Question 1. Could the City advise if they have contacted Perth Modern School and/or the Department of Education to see if there is any suitable and significant access to viable active playing fields for the community at Perth Modern School? Question 2. What evidence and consultation is the City relying on to validate their claim that the opportunity at Perth Modern will go a large part of the way to achieving the 1.73 hectares? Please include details on the amount and availability of access times City staff have determined and what local community sports could be accommodated at Perth Modern School. Thank you.
Thank you. The Acting Director will answer your questions.
Thank you for the questions, and through you, Presiding Member. In response to your first question, following the finalisation of the Subi Oval Agreement, the City will commence a process to discuss and consider mutually beneficial opportunities with the schools in the area and to increase access to active open space in Subiaco East. In response to your second question, while the agreement for the use of Subiaco Oval is unique to the City, sharing school ovals is not uncommon across Western Australia. So going forward, we will holistically consider a range of options in planning for additional access to open space for our growing community into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary, would you like to now return to the lectern for your questions?
Thank you. Question 1. The Subiaco Oval Shared User Agreement was endorsed by this Council on 24th August 2021. The Officer Report at item C3 states that parties were notified of a major error, very kindly referred to as a misalignment, in the agreement, and subsequently on 1st of August 2021, the WA Football Commission agreed to sign an agreement which included a key clause that had been omitted. My question is, prior to 1st September 2021, had all parties, that is the State Government, Subiaco Council and the Football Commission, signed the agreement? If all parties had not signed, which party or parties were they? Who discovered the omission? How and when were the other parties notified? Who has liaised with the WA Football Commission regarding this issue? That's one question. Question 2. Does the agreement include the 6 hard courts currently occupying the land that was supposedly earmarked for a shared Subiaco Council and Bob Hawke College shared recreational facility? If not, why not? And should the agreement be amended once again to allow for yet another misalignment? Thank you.
Thank you, Acting Director.
Thank you again for your questions, and through your presiding member, the Subiaco Oval Shared User Agreement was not executed at the 1st of September 2021 by any party. The omission was raised by an elected member, and city officers liaised with their respective parties, and we hope that the agreement will be executed very shortly. In response to your second question, the land subject to the Subiaco Oval Shared User Agreement includes Subiaco Oval. This information, as well as more information, is provided in the background section of the report to the 24th of August 2021 Ordinary Council meeting, and this has been placed on the public record. Thank you.
Presiding members just asked me to add a little bit to clarify. So just so you're aware, the information was contained within the council schedule and it was just omitted even though it was intended to be included. So all the parties were aware that that should have formed part of the document. So we're just doing as a procedural motion in terms of making sure that there's a good audit trail of council agreeing to what was attached, which had that omission. So that was the only omission, and as it's indicated, it was an elected member that alerted us to it, so that's why we brought it back. Correct.
I'm sorry, Mary. If you'd like to take this up with staff tomorrow or something, or sure, a phone call can sort out the rest of your queries. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 6 and public statement time. I'd like to invite Bruce Thompson to the lectern. Thank you.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. This statement is about the Seddon Street public realm upgrade, the concept plan. This was initially sent to Mr. Colin Cameron, the CEO. So I'll just read directly from it, if I may. So it was, "Dear Colin, I am a supporter of this concept design and think the city is really on the right track. My main comments are the concept needs to go further to create a permanent public green space for the city of a decent size, a green town square. This would be achieved by including the Seddon Street and the car park, those two pieces of land, as one pedestrianised public space with required parking below grade in the future and to the west edge of this public space opportunity. This public space could flow through the buildings to Hay Street and reactivate the Sanua heritage buildings at ground level and reactivate Hay Street itself. This space could become the home of a permanent city market in the short and long term. There should not be an additional lane access into Hay Street. Bearing in mind that the city is growing and in the past was the home to two thriving markets, Seddon Street Market Square could be the first beating heart for Subiaco. The other for consideration is the ready-made Market Square and the car park between Farmer Jack's and the old Coles building. This could also be a second green town square with required parking below grade and in the future, and support Farmer Jack's and other vendors with a broader open-air market-style offering of local food and beverages. These two public spaces could transform business vibrancy in the city and be a boon for choice for residents and visitors. The council may consider investing directly into them as a means of adding value to the city and offering more to residents and ratepayers. For your consideration, please, and happy to discuss these concepts in more detail if needed. So my name is Bruce Thompson. I'm a resident and candidate for East Ward Subiaco. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd like to invite our past serving mayor, Tony Costa, to the lectern. Thank you, Tony.
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. As a long-time Subiaco resident, ratepayer, and then councillor in 83 to 94, and the People's Mayor 94 to 2005, I am not surprised that the Premier and Development WA knocked back a meeting with a delegate from the council. There's nothing new to discuss, but there could have been. If Councillor Phelan's motion to initiate a scheme amendment to change the entire Subiaco Oval Reserve to Parks and Recreation had been supported, you would have a more concrete reason to meet with the Premier. During the past 60 days, the scheme amendment process would cause Council to consult with the community to find out if there is any support for a scheme amendment on Subiaco Oval. If there was, there would be a report and the results to discuss with the Premier. But there's nothing to discuss. There's been no structured consultation with the community on Subiaco Oval since 2016. And dare I say, that is shameful. Development WA has done its tick-a-box consultation. Council supported the plans for landscaping and public realm March 2021, and the Premier believes there's nothing to discuss with the Premier until you, the elected councillors, do something different. Initiated a scheme amendment is different. You, councillors, must consult with the community for 60 days. Find out what they think rather than ignoring them. The very idea that parts of Subiaco heritage at the reserve will be carved up for high-rise blocks of flats and commercial buildings is appalling and unwanted. This council has the power to initiate a scheme amendment to the LPS 5 scheme map and advertise and consult for 60 days. So what are you councillors waiting for? Thank you.
Mary Mcmullen, would you like to come to the lectern? Thank you.
Last month, at least 3 people, including an ex-councillor, ex-mayor and me, stood here to reason and plead with you to permit the people of Subiaco to view the draft Subiaco Oval Shared User Agreement before endorsement and signing, but you all refused and endorsed it regardless. So now a major error, misalignment, has been discovered and the agreement has to be amended and re-signed or signed again. What else has been missed? Have the hard courts been included? Obviously not, from my questions. So we don't know what the hours of usage and maintenance responsibilities for this shared facility are. Were any of the numerous sporting clubs in the area consulted about the agreement? If so, which ones? What were the discussions about? And did it have any impact on the agreement? Are new fences going to be built around the oval and hard courts, and by whom, to prevent balls being kicked or thrown into the street? There are numerous safety issues involved here for the children and for the motorists driving past this area. What does cease to occupy actually mean? This is very unclear. Does occupy mean even one piece of furniture in the building or shed that might be on Football Commission land? Does occupy mean even one person working in the building? Does occupy mean even a few hours occupation per week? What happens if the WAFC's lease is terminated? Does the building and land become the property or come under the ownership of Subiaco Council? Will there be a cost involved to council? If so, how much? Or is the state government able to keep it for its own use, share it with the school, with council? Who will pay for the upkeep in these circumstances, and who gets to say what it gets used for, when, and by whom? We have much legal expertise on this council, but despite this, a major error in the shared user agreement was overlooked. I'm not pointing a finger or trying to reflect badly on anyone. Every single one of us makes mistakes despite our best efforts. But that is precisely why this agreement should be open for comment by the community prior to endorsement and signing. We have just had 4 long years of secrecy, of ignoring community sentiment, of ignoring community advice, and of course the continuing fallout from the absolutely disastrous and secret MOU. Please do not subject the residents and ratepayers of the City of Subiaco to another 4 years of the same. Thank you.
That completes our questions and statements. Thank you for your contribution, gallery members. Moving on to agenda item 7, petitions and approved deputations. Do we have any petitions, councillors? No, thank you. Agenda item 8, confirmation of minutes of previous meetings. Can I please have a mover and a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Nash. Thank you, Councillor De Vries. For the 8.1 Ordinary Council meeting of the 24th of August 2021. We'll put that to the vote. Thank you. That is being carried unanimously 7-0. Thank you. Moving on to announcements by the presiding member. I have one very short announcement, and that is there's a new book out on local government. Subiaco is mentioned in this book, of course, because it's about the history of local government. Apparently it also mentions Tony Costa, even our CEO here on the right gets a paragraph, and so we'll all be looking into it now, won't we? But also importantly, our first female mayor for local government, who was the mayor of Subiaco, Evelyn Parker. So good reading, and it's will be in our library. Thank you. We'll now move on to officers' reports, agenda item 10. For the information of the public gallery, it is intended that a number of the recommendations presented to this meeting will be grouped together and passed en bloc, as no amendments or alternative motions have been received from elected members for these recommendations. I now ask the meeting whether there are any other agenda items to be withdrawn from the en bloc vote. Yes, thank you, Councillor Rampal.
Yes, could C4, I think it is. Could that be removed, please? That's the Salvador Road, the RIR.
Thank you. Do I have any to withdraw? Yes, thank you, Councillor Hammersley.
Yes, C8. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more items to withdraw from the block? Okay, thank you, councillors. Then can I please have a mover and seconder for the items C2, C3, C5 and C6 contained in the agenda of the Ordinary Council meeting of the 21st of September 2021 to be adopted en bloc. Thank you, Councillor Jennings and Councillor, so that was Councillor Nash. Thank you. I'll put this to the vote. Carried unanimously 7-0. Thank you. For the benefit of the public gallery, that means agenda items C2, C3, C5 and C6 have been unanimously carried. Thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda item C1 about the draft local planning policy 2.2. Can I please have a mover and a seconder for this item? Mover, Councillor Mansfield. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Jennings, thank you. Councillor Mansfield, would you like to speak to the item?
I'll reserve, thanks, Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Jennings, you reserve, thank you. Would anybody like to speak to this item? We do have an amendment by Councillor Hammersley. So, failing anyone to speak, Councillor Hammersley, would you like to present your amendment?
Thank you, yes. So my amendment just proposes in two places in the policy to revert from wording that was proposed post-advertising back to the wording that was advertised. And so I'd like to see if there was a seconder for that concept. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor De Vries. Councillor De Vries, would you like to speak to the item?
I'll reserve my right, thank you.
Would anybody like to speak for or against this item? And I'll put it to the vote. Thank you. That has been carried. Thank you, councillors. 6-1. We're now talking to the substantive motion with the amendment. Do we have any speakers for this item? Councillor Mansfield, would you like to close? No. Okay, thank you. Then I will put this to the vote. Thank you. Sorry, we seem to have missed your vote, Councillor Powell. So stop for a minute. So what we're actually doing now is putting it back to the full vote. Thank you. So if everybody could vote again, thank you. Thank you. That's carried unanimously 7-0. Moving on to the next item of business is agenda item C4. I gather Councillor Powell did pull this item. Would you like to speak to or move it, Councillor Powell, or do we have another mover or seconder? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so Councillor Nash has moved and Councillor De Vries has seconded. Councillor Nash, would you like to speak to this item?
I'll reserve, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor De Vries, would you like to speak to the item?
I'll reserve my right, thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody like to speak for or against this item? Perhaps it's your turn. Thank you, Councillor Powell.
I'm not actually speaking for or against. We only received the RAR on Friday afternoon, So I have a number of questions about what's in it, and I think that will determine whether I wish to speak to the item at all. So if I could put to you through, if I could ask you, Presiding Officer, for staff, well, first question, it's a 7-storey building. It hasn't received design excellence from the design review panel. So why does it deserve 7 storeys?
Thank you, and through you, Presiding Member. The planning framework has been established as a local development plan which contemplates 6 storeys on that development site. This is proposing an additional story, so it's 7 storeys. We looked at the impact closely. In terms of streetscape, the uppermost level is not visible from any of the adjoining streets as we calculate it. In terms of design review, it's gone to the design review panel on three occasions, and it has achieved high quality design. It doesn't need to achieve design excellence under the planning framework to get the additional height.
Okay, thank you. If we could move on to the dwelling mix. Does the dwelling mix meet what are the standards? Because there seems to be quite a lot of small apartments and studio apartments in the complex.
Thank you, and through you, Presiding Member. This site is a little bit complicated. It was under the control of Development WA last year, and they established a planning framework. It was purchased by the developer as one property. The first, stage is the townhouse developments, which are soon to commence construction. There's 41 townhouses. One of the conditions associated with that was affordable housing, and that's been deferred to this development. And in terms of dwelling mix, when you look at the development site as a whole, being the townhouses and the proposed apartments, it achieves the required mix.
But on that point, we can only consider this application by itself, can we not? Because the townhouses were approved by another authority. So we're really just looking at this apartment block. We can't really take into account other factors that are outside our control.
Thank you, and through you, Presiding Member. As I mentioned in my previous response, it is an unusual arrangement how the planning framework has kind of occurred. The City has assumed planning control through the normalisation process at the end of last year. The stage 1 was the townhouse development, and there was a number of conditions that deferred those requirements into stage 2 under the Metropolitan Redevelopment Act. The City has to respect the transition between the two planning frameworks, and from a planning perspective, it is entirely reasonable and pragmatic to deal with, both matters concurrently and the issues at hand.
Thank you. Can we address the size of the apartments? Do all of the apartments meet the minimum size allowed? Because some of them seem to be quite small.
Thank you, and through you, Presiding Member. I'm not sure exactly which apartments Councillor Powell's referring to. There's 4 studio apartments. All of the dwellings meet the required standards, and the development meets the element objectives of the SPP 7.3.
Look, I was just referring to a section of the RAR which said that all apartments are considered to be functional, but some apartments are 1 or 2 square metres less than the acceptable outcome.
Thank you, and through you, Presiding Member. The acceptable outcome is only one way of satisfying the element objective, so it's not uncommon with apartment developments of this scale where dwellings don't necessarily meet the acceptable outcome, but can still achieve the element objective.
Does anybody else have any questions, or shall I just continue on? Could we address overshadowing? Is there any problem with the overshadowing, especially of the nearby townhouses?
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. Yeah, so the overshadowing is calculated at the winter solstice, so it's falling to the south. So, no.
Okay. The ground floor terrace, their outdoor areas, do they meet minimum requirements? Again, I'm quoting from the RAR saying that they should be, I think, 15 square metres, and some of them are only 8. So what would be the reason for supporting that, I suppose?
Can you just clarify what you're talking about in terms of 15 and 8? Are you talking about the outdoor living space or the actual... You couldn't be talking about the actual apartments, so just a little bit more clarity. Thank you, Councillor Powell.
Thank you. No, apologies for that. No, it is the courtyard area, the outdoor area of those ground floor flats.
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. Yeah, so if it doesn't necessarily meet the acceptable outcome, there's a range of considerations in meeting the element objectives. This has got a considerable communal green space above the podium, and that is considered to, I guess, provide for a range of opportunities for residents of the facility to enjoy the outdoor space.
What provisions have been made for contribution to public artwork? Will they be making, well, what provisions have been made?
Thank you, and through you, presiding member, there's a condition that's been recommended which requires the provision of public art.
So do we know whether that public art will be on the location itself, or will it be a contribution to a fund? Is that determined yet at all?
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. That's detailed in the condition and advice note, and that's pretty standard. Many of these questions are actually in the responsible authority report and the attachment there within, and it includes the planning officer's assessment of the proposal, and a lot of the questions that you're asking actually is in the detail. So we keep referring to those, and I don't know if there are any further critical questions that you have on the proposal. I mean, and we can sit down with you after the council meeting to go through these if you like as well.
The reason why I'm going through them now is because we didn't receive it until Friday, so covering the detail now for me is quite important before we make a decision. If we've made a decision, there isn't a lot of use going back and asking what the detail is. So there are queries as well about the internal layout and whether the corridors meet acceptable standards. Do they? And is there enough natural light and ventilation? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. The corridor width was a concern of the design review panel early in the design review process. That has been refined by the applicant throughout the design, and that particular element of it has been supported by the design review panel, which is comprised of architects who look at the particular detail especially. Yeah. And in relation to, I guess, the natural light and amenity, that's also been improved throughout the various versions of the development, and also that has been reflected in, if you look at table 3 of the RAR itself, you can see the design evolution as it's gone through those phases.
Could I have a comment perhaps on the DRP view then, that perhaps a different mix of apartment sizes or perhaps a reduction might have brought about a better design result?
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. The DRP was obviously looking at this development in isolation. They could have done a number of different changes in terms of the applicant and their design response. The end product is that the design review panel considers this development to be of a high quality design. I do note that the development, whilst it's seeking a height variation, it is well below the permitted plot ratio allowed for the site. If the plot ratio had exceeded the acceptable outcome, then those, I guess, those comments that you're referring to may have been looked at more closely, but the development as a whole has been supported.
Who will own Greenwood Lane in the development, and who will be responsible for its maintenance?
Thank you, and through you, presiding member, Greenwood Lane is a city asset, managed asset.
I suppose, who will there is an easement, I think, I'm going back and trying to recall from the plans. There's an easement in the development. Who will, is there? Am I on the wrong track? Sorry,
Thank you, and through you, presiding member, this goes back to the local development plan where it was agreed that all the road reserves will be transferred to the Crown and subject to a management order, so it'd be like any other road that the city manages.
And getting towards the end now, the landscaping. There were concerns about that. Have they been, especially about the Tipuana trees, have they been addressed?
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. The design review panel did have some concerns regarding the landscaping. The proposal does meet an acceptable outcome in terms of the provision of on-structure planting. I also note that, as I've mentioned before, that the site should be looked in the context of the whole development site, notwithstanding that this is an individual application. The local development plan process and the subdivision process that the applicant embarked on with Develop WA last year saw the provision of approximately 10% of open space contributed in a north-south link just to the east of the site. So there's considered to be significant landscaping available on site and in the immediate locality. And also Condition 10 recommends that landscaping be completed in accordance with the approved landscaping plan.
Do we have any further comments or questions? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Hammersley.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on that thing about the corridors. I presume that everyone's satisfied that people will be able to get their furniture down the corridor and into their apartment.
Thank you, and through your presiding member. As I mentioned before, it is reviewed by the design review panel. That is one of the tests that they actually look at. They encourage applicants to use their own modelling to make sure that it can be achieved, but it is definitely a key concern.
Any more questions or comments? I'll exercise standing orders 4.7 and 4.8 to enter into debate and ask some questions. I would like some clarity over the size of these apartments. There seems to be a considerable number that are only around 42 square metres. And yet you are saying that there are only 4 studio apartments. So can you just please expand a little bit further on that? So are the rest of them, for example, 1-bedroom apartments? And how many are of 42 square metres? They look like at least 40 or more to me. And that is, I paced out my living room being an apartment living person, and that is no bigger than my living room, so that is really, really small. So can you, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. So some of the plans show sizes on there. All that detailed information we have, and we'll just need some time to have a look into. However, when you look at the areas of 41 and 42 square metres. It doesn't necessarily take into account the outdoor living spaces as well. So the outdoor living spaces will add to that, and they can easily push it up to 50 or 55 square metres. So there are a range of apartments in here. There are some one-bedroom apartments, and a number of 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. Even though they may be small, the design process that this application went through, they were considered in their functionality, and they were considered to be supportable by the design review panel. So much of the time it is a layout. There is also consideration about providing people options as well. So some people may enjoy the smaller ones, and some people would like larger ones as well. So in the end, to answer your question, they've gone through design testing. They seem to be supportable and functional according to the design review panel. They're generally consistent with the lot, with the apartment sizes in the Art Codes Volume 2. So that's how we've gotten to recommendation of approval. It's a commercial decision for applicants and developers if they like to have many smaller apartments or fewer larger apartments. So we can't make that decision for them.
Therein lies the rub, I feel, because it does become a commercial decision rather than a planning law decision. But I would like clarity, thank you, on affordable. So there is a quota of 10% being affordable or social housing. Now we understand social housing because that is what the government will buy and provide. But what makes it affordable? The size? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. Affordable housing is termed by the development policy of Development WA. So there are a number of provisions in there. In clearing the condition, the city would need to be satisfied that either these are provided to the Department of Communities, as is generally standard practice, or there are other not-for-profit organisations such as Foundation Housing, for example, which provides affordable housing options to key workers. That is a condition clearance process that the city would need to be absolutely satisfied that the housing provided is affordable and provided to those key demographics. So there are a number of options on there. We know it's a key government mandate as well to have this, so we'll be very careful in our consideration of this. There is always the Department of Communities option to fall back on.
Okay, thank you for that. To me, you have outlined who's going to buy the apartments, but what actually defines their affordability? The purchaser. Is that what you're suggesting?
Thank you, and through presiding member, it would be through the scheme that they're provided. So if they're provided to the Department of Communities, then it would be through that condition, and there'd be an agreement that they'd be provided to be affordable in perpetuity, for example. We'd expect that the Department of Communities not on sell them. If it's another service provider, it would be a similar provision.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments on this? Thank you, Councillor Powell.
Yeah, look, I'll speak to it if I can. Look, there are valid planning grounds why this could be refused. The first being that it's 7 stories in a 6-storey area. But look, I'm not really minded about looking to approval or refusal. What my concern is at the moment is that the lack of adequate time to properly assess this proposal. It didn't arrive, the RIA didn't arrive until Friday afternoon. It's about 400 pages long, and it's full of technical detail, and in essence there was half a working day to read, assess and propose any amendments or conditions that Council may have wished to add to the officer's recommendation. So I don't feel there's enough time to make an informed decision either for or against. If Council doesn't support the officer recommendation, then I would foreshadow an alternative from the floor, if that was acceptable, and that would be in the section of the RAR for the council comment, for the words to be inserted that council has not made a determination on this application due to insufficient time to properly assess the RAR and thus reach an informed decision. Now, if other councillors feel that they haven't had sufficient time, as we are also dealing with other items on the agenda, then they may feel inclined to support an alternative, which is not for saying yes, it's not for saying no, it's for saying we simply haven't had enough time to consider what is a very complex document. Because they're the work of dozens of people, they cost a lot of money to produce the RARs, there's consultants, there's a labour-intensive undertaking, and it should be given due regard by the elected members. These developments, they change the face of the city and they are changing where we live. And I think it's important that council have its viewpoint heard on behalf of the community. And additionally, residents who make their submissions, they're affected by these developments, the amenity overshadowing and a host of other things, and they deserve to know that their concerns are being heard by their elected representatives. So I think these RARs are too important to pass without proper consideration by elected members. So that's what I would be foreshadowing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor De Vries.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, Presiding Member, this is a question for the Acting Manager for Planning Services. Just should that alternative come through tonight, would that delay the decision on the approval of this and going to the JDAP, or will it just still go forward? And what kind of, impact would it have on the decision making for this development?
Thank you. And through Presiding Member, we're required by legislation to submit the Responsible Authority report by midday tomorrow, 22nd of September. That was on an extension granted by the applicant to be able to have the item considered at this ordinary council meeting. So there are legislative timeframes, and in any event, the city will be submitting its Responsible Authority report tomorrow, as is required by legislation, and that would be considered likely by the Joint Development Assessment Panel members with the council's whatever it resolves, and obviously the officer recommendation will form part of the RAR as well.
Do I have any more speakers to this item? Councillor Nash, would you like to close the item? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Look, just quickly, I would simply say that point out that I also received this at the same time as Councillor Power, and have had more than adequate time to properly assess the RAR. So that may be an individual thing, and certainly I agree with the acting director in saying that most of those questions that were answered are actually in the report. It's clearly been time to formulate the questions around that. So I don't quite understand what's going on there. There are these days, in respect to a statement made, these days commercial, in my experience, commercial priorities do correspond to planning priorities and to align with that, because the system is designed to enable that and to provide a good result in both respects. I'm sure property developers are acutely aware that if they don't design things properly, that they won't get the sales that they need. I don't think I have anything further to add. I look forward to this being supported.
Thank you, Councillor Nash. I'll put this development to the vote. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. That has carried 4-3.
Presiding member, I thought I voted no, but it was showing as yes for me up there on the screen.
And Councillor Mansfield, did you vote for the item? I think perhaps you've got the wrong. You're going to have to swap round your system. Yeah. So I'll just seek governance advice about this. Thank you. By all means, you go ahead, but perhaps we should redo the vote.
We'll just, if that's what's known.
Excuse. Well, that could have been an interesting meeting between you two. Are you, Councillor Mansfield and Councillor Jennings, are you happy if it's recorded that Councillor Mansfield voted for the item and Councillor Jennings voted against? Thank you. Have you now swapped over your... Okay, we'll swap. Okay, thank you, councillors, and apologise for the confusion. Moving on to agenda item C7, Subiaco East, an update following a council resolution. There are also 2 amendments for this item. Councillors, do we have a mover and a seconder for this item? Thank you. Councillor Mansfield and Councillor De Vries is seconding it. I'll just seek governance advice. I'm concerned whether we're going to run out of potential movers and seconders for the amendments given the low numbers. So let me just... Just a reminder, thank you, councillors. Due to our very low numbers, if Councillor Jennings plans to put up her amendment and have it second, and if someone is planning to put up Councillor Mcmullen's amendment, you just need to not speak so that you have an opportunity to put forward those amendments, including the seconders. Thank you. But we'll proceed as is. Thank you. So. Who was the mover? That was Councillor Mansfield. Thank you, Councillor.
I was at this stage.
Thank you. Councillor De Vries. Okay. So just for our recording, Councillor Mansfield has reserved her right, and so has Councillor De Vries. Then we better move on to moving the amendment. I believe the first amendment on the table was Councillor Jennings. Councillor Jennings, do you wish to move your amendment? Thank you. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Jennings' amendment? Councillor Powell, thank you. Councillor Jennings, would you like to speak to your amendment?
Just very briefly, thank you, Presiding Member. It just speaks for itself. I was going for the benefit of the gallery or the listeners at home. It's basically stating the city's position about the lack of active green playing fields, recreation space at the Subiaco East redevelopment area, and reiterating the the commitments in the memorandum of understanding about that by the government, that as much active recreation space as possible would be included in the master planning of the precinct, that the master plan should and could have included, and the planning for the precinct could have included that extra space, and the planning for the precinct can still be amended to include such additional space above that provided by the Oval and the hard courts. And staff have supported this amendment, and it's just stating essentially the city's position about the lack of extra space, active space in the redevelopment. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Councillor Power, would you like to speak to the item? You're reserving your right. Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak to the amendment? Okay, thank you. Then we'll put the amendment to the vote. Thank you. That item has been carried 5-2. Thank you. Moving on to, we have a second amendment here, which was Councillor Mcmullen's amendment. Councillor Hammersley, I believe you are interested in moving this amendment. Do we have someone else who can move this, second this item? I don't think you can, thank you. And Councillor Jennings has now spoken, so anyone can second. Thank you for refreshing my memory. Thank you, Councillor De Vries. Councillor Hammersley, would you like to speak to this item?
Thank you. I'll have a go on behalf of Councillor Mcmullen, who wasn't able to come last minute. So the proposals to add some words to point 2 of the staff recommendation, I think, just to make it a little bit clearer as to what we might expect in a report. And I think the key point is picking up on his use of the words provision of and access to. So I think there are 2 issues. There's what we can do on the current, well, what was a reserve. So that's that issue around, is there anything we can do on the actual land that is the subject of the discussion. And then I think the second part is the access to, which we see in the staff report has been revived and has actually been something that Council has put on the agenda a year ago, but other things have been being done. So that's his first proposal. The next one is just to formally put on the record dissatisfaction with the letters from the Premier and the Chair. I think that's pretty self-obvious. It's always disappointing when somebody doesn't want to talk to you, when you have an issue that you think is important, that's an intergenerational issue. And so while that won't do anything, it probably doesn't hurt to just put it on the formal record. So if anyone's doing a PhD on why there's no sporting facilities for all the little kids living in the inner city, they can read it. And then the fourth one, the next one is just to earmark, to foreshadow that it proposed that the matter be further considered following the election. In other words, there's going to be a change of council, and we don't want to just leave this one drifting off into the ether, to make sure it's picked up. So they are the proposed amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hammersley. Councillor De Vries, would you like to talk to the item? Thank you.
I think it just is relevant here to read from the reasons given by Councillor Mcmullen for his amendment, and I do support this amendment and its sentiment as well. But point 2 was that he, to ensure that fulsome information is supplied for Council's consideration. I think that report, if it's very thorough, we'll have a better understanding of our options, and that report will be something we can work with and continue on into the future. So I think that's a relevant point. Well, obviously, point 3, that, obviously we are dissatisfied. I think Councillor Hammersley has made that point quite clearly. I think any kind of process of deep community concern does require ongoing discourse, and it's a pity that it's kind of the door was shut. Let's hope it might open again later on. And point 4, that the city's, this is a matter that in future, the new mayor and the new council, along with the city's new CEO, will give it further consideration. So it's not that we've shut this discussion at council. We're certainly very keen to continue into the next council. So they're the key points that were put forward by Councillor Mcmullen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Presiding Member. This is a question. So we have my amendment's been accepted, and that would presumably become resolution number 3. And then we've got the current amendments under consideration, and they're numbered after number 2. They're 3 and 4. So how do we deal with the numbering thing?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Jennings. I looked at this afternoon actually and mocked up my own, if they both how it works. So, governance, can you actually? Is it possible to put it up so we can see how it actually works? Or you? No, you don't have this, but can you?
It takes a while. It's easier just to explain. Yeah.
Okay. You're happy? Yes. Oh, you. Thank you. The CEO. That's a good idea. Thank you, CEO.
Yes. Assuming if this were to be passed, then what would occur is the numbers would be changed to add a 4 and a 5. So it would just logically be put together. So we can do that if this is done, I'm assuming. Yeah. So we'll put that up once we deal with this matter, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you, CEO. So the way I looked at it this afternoon, point 1 stays the same, which is the staff's recommendation. Point 2 is Councillor Mcmullen's amendment, starting with the Chief Executive Officer is requested to consider. Point 3 would be Councillor Jennings' amendment, which starts with that Councillor reiterates the city's position. Point 4 would go back to Councillor Mcmullen's amendment, which starts with Council in passing the above resolutions. And point 5 would also be Councillor Mcmullen's amendment, which starts with this matter will be further considered. Is everyone clear on that? I'm comfortable to now go to the vote on Councillor Mcmullen's amendment.
I haven't had a chance to speak.
Then please, thank you, Councillor Nash.
Yes, I intend to vote against this amendment. The city has a sorry history of flogging a dead horse, and we need to look no further than still seeking to have football at Subiaco when Optus Stadium was already under construction, and there have been others. The Premier's already indicated that the master plan for Subiaco East will remain as finalised. I don't know which part of no we don't understand, but there could be no clearer indication that this decision has been made, and that other than grandstanding, and I'd suggest electioneering, I can't see any obvious point in going down this track and pursuing this any further.
Do we have any further comments to this item, for or against? Then I'll put the amendment to the vote. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. That's been carried 5-2. We'll now have the substantive motion with the 2 amendments. I'll just see if governance is ready to put this up. Thank you. Thank you, governance. Now, would anybody like to speak to the substantive motion? Anybody like to speak for or against? Thank you, Councillor Jennings.
I just wanted to speak to the point about considering the matter further, and I appreciate Councillor Nash's point, you know, that it does seem like the state is pretty intractable in its position, but the point, it seems to me, of considering the matter further is actually in relation to, or includes, or necessarily includes the school space. So that is also part of the considerations that will come back to council. So it's not just, you know, trying to get the government to change its position. It's actually also pursuing that aspect of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Do we have any more speakers for or against? Councillor Nash, thank you.
Yes, look, I'm unable to support the substantive motion with the amendments that have been made, but I'd like to point out that I do too support point 2. I think it's still point 2, is it? Of the motion, which we've already, I think, have on record as to increase the active open space in Subiaco East by investigating the shared use of school ovals. I think that's a no-brainer.
Thank you. Councillor De Vries, thank you.
Yeah, I think I have to say this is a report that is lateral thinking. It's looking for a solution to a problem that the community is clearly very concerned about still. And I think the fact that we are really digging in and looking for a solution that will work, it will be a positive for the schools if they look into it and find it suits them as well. But certainly, you know, looking around for land that's available, it seems to go a long way to meeting the needs of the community if that's possible to be used. So I think it's opening up a new dialogue and it's giving the community something that might work. It's probably you know, something which might take time to unpack, but I think the fact that that's been looked at is a real positive. So I do support the substantive. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak before or against this item? Councillor Mansfield, I believe you moved the item. Would you like to close or would you like to speak and close? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Then I'll put the item to the vote. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. That's been carried 5-2. Okay, thank you, councillors. Moving on to agenda item C8, which is the Seddon Street Public Realm Upgrade Concept Design. Do we have a mover and a seconder for this item? Councillor Nash, thank you. Do we have a seconder for this item? Then the item will lapse. Thank you. Moving on to, let me just give me a moment. Okay, thank you, councillors. Moving on to agenda item 11, elected members' motions of which previous notice has been given. There are none. We move on to agenda item number 12, which is new business of an urgent nature approved by the person presiding or by a decision of the meeting. Councillor Jennings has raised an urgent business motion today. Did everybody receive that item? I assume no one's protesting. So the CEO would like to provide some governance advice on this item. Thank you.
Just if I could, for clarity for the councillors. So this forms part of an amendment that was put forward by Councillor Jennings, and my responsibility in relation to putting forward the agenda is that I have to consider the caretaker policy that Council has endorsed. And in considering that with that particular issue, as well as another one that was put forward by another councillor, I considered that the caretaker policy was in play in terms of it being a major decision. And what I'm then supposed to do under that policy, as council have adopted, is consider whether or not the matter is urgent or it could wait till after the election. And so that is the reason why myself as CEO made that determination in relation to this matter and considered it not to be urgent. So that's just what I wanted to advise council of.
Thank you, CEO. Can I have just clarity here that if this was raised not as urgent business but as an elected member's motion at the next meeting, that would be acceptable still? Because it's just that you referred to after the election, but we do have an October OCM.
That is correct. It would need to be an elected member's motion that would contained, in my view, to put on the agenda, would need to be after the election, because the elected member's policy in relation to the caretaker period pretty much covers that. So in that regard, in me doing what I'm required to do in relation to that policy, I would not be putting it on the agenda until after the council election.
Are there any questions about this matter? No? Okay. Councillor Jennings, thank you.
Thank you. Through you, presiding member, it's probably to the CEO. Just to clarify, I believe the next OCM is after the election, which is the election's on the 16th. Is that not correct? It's before that, is it? Oh, sorry, I just haven't checked the date.
Sorry, if I could, through the chair. Originally, we had put the next ordinary council meeting in October to be tentative, depending upon what items are on. We've now changed that so that it will occur prior to the council elections. So it would be the ordinary council meeting that followed after the special council meeting of the swearing in of the councillors. So that would be the first opportunity when the caretaker policy would no longer be a consideration.
I've got a question, thank you. I understood that we still had in our yearly diary, the next council meeting was actually the 12th of October, which was before. Correct. So you're saying we're no longer having that it's now after? We are, okay. So we're having, so we do have an OCM left for the 12th of October, and then we go to election on the 16th, 17th of October, I think the dates might, 16th. And then we will have a special council meeting probably on the 18th or so. And then we potentially have another OCM perhaps a week later in that month. Is that what you're actually proposing? But that actually confirms there will be one more OCM before the election. Thank you.
Yes, there is one more election before the council elections. However, given the caretaker policy takes into account the first opportunity would be following the election.
Okay, but to clarify, the caretaker policy does not override a local law. So I believe that if Councillor Jennings is in the mind to put this up as elected member's motion, she can do so despite a caretaker policy. Am I correct?
It depends on the question that you're referring to. If you're asking when the agenda is prepared, I would need to act in accordance with the caretaker policy. So I would not be putting it on the I would not be putting the matter before council until after the election. In terms of whether or not it's urgent business, that is obviously for you as presiding member to determine, or if the council were not to agree with that, they could seek to have that ruling determined. But what I was indicating was that as CEO, I'm required to give that consideration in preparing the agenda, and I did that, and my assessment was that it was a major policy decision and it was not considered urgent, and that's why that plus one other elected member's motion was not contained within the agenda. But ultimately, determining whether council wishes to proceed with this as a matter of urgency would be a consideration for yourself as presiding member in the first instance.
Thank you, Councillor Hammersley.
Yeah, this is a question on governance. So a policy obviously does bind the CEO, but is my understanding correct? Policies don't bind councils because we are the governing body as we sit here, and we see many, many decisions made against policies, none more so than in planning. So I was just wanting to clarify that because I think we've moved into a different territory with the urgent business motion, and really is for the council to control its own procedure, I would have thought, but can we have some advice on that?
Perhaps if I can respond through the chair to describe, ideally, council adopt policies that they wish to adhere to. That's a governance principle. But as a matter of law, the council can deal with matters, so long as it's not ultra vires, as they deem appropriate. So I was trying to describe my role in setting the agenda, and now council, obviously, firstly, the presiding member will make a determination as to whether that's urgent. But in terms of governance, ideally, if you're uncomfortable with a policy, I recommended changing the policy in the first instance as a good decision-making practice.
Thank you, Councillor Powell.
Sorry, this might be a bit difficult, but you've referred a couple of times to it being a major policy decision. I realise we've got to tiptoe around this a little bit, but I'm just wondering how getting legal advice is a major policy decision. It's not an action. It's just receiving the advice. So could you just clarify how that breaches how that may breach the caretaker provisions?
So if I could, through the chair. So one of the things that is intended is there's a definition of major policy decisions, and Part C talks about irrevocable decisions that commit the city to substantial expenditure or significant actions. So you'd argue that probably gaining legal advice doesn't implicate you in terms of significant actions, but it does in terms of substantial expenditure. And my job, I suppose, was looking at two matters that came before me and considering the balance of those. And in that regard, I considered that these decisions, once you've gone seek advice, you can't change them. And potentially the way it's described, it could be substantial expenditure, although that's not described. I mean, there is a matter B above it that talks about a sponsorship, and $10,000 doesn't say that that is substantial expenditure. So, and the other matter is in relation to Part E, which talks about reports or requested initiated by a councillor or candidate that may be perceived as an electoral issue. And so in that regard, I form the view that relating to those two particular elected members' motions that were put to me, that they fit within the policy relating to the caretaker that was adopted by council, which put me as the decision maker in relation to those matters on the agenda.
Just to follow up, so it's on the basis of cost, potential cost, and that it may be an electoral issue. I don't know how much legal advice costs. I would have thought perhaps not an enormous amount, but but that's one issue, and that it may be an electoral issue. Is that really the fulcrum of it?
Yeah, that's correct. That's described as a major policy decision on page 52 of the policy manual.
Thank you. Have we finished with our questions and deliberation? Thank you. Thank you. We've got a very new CEO here, and I thank you. You've put under the pump a bit there on a rather unusual situation. I'm going to err to your advice and not accept this as an urgent business motion. Yes, Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I would like to move a procedural motion that your ruling be disagreed with, please.
Do I have a seconder for Councillor Jennings? Thank you, Councillor Hammersley. We just put that straight to the vote. Thank you. What do I do? Am I conflicted?
For those watching at home, there's a technical matter in relation to our voting system, and also our one journalist and one person in attending still, that it's just a technical matter in relation to our voting system that we're trying to resolve.
Councillors, that has been lost 3-4. Yes, Councillor Nash.
If we've finished with that, have we finished with that particular matter? I'm just wondering if I have a chance to ask a question about C8, which sort of came and went very quickly. How can I seek some clarification in relation to that? Yes, I know that.
Councillor Nash, the item has been dealt with in the sense that I did call a mover and a seconder, and I did wait for the usual period of time, and no one seconded, so that's why the item lapsed. Would you like clarification of what that actually means when an item lapses? Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you, CEO.
So the matter wasn't dealt with, so it's as if it didn't appear, but I don't think it's of any major consequence, you think? Because we could resubmit it to the October meeting. But I think ideally what would benefit is if there was further questions that may be asked prior to that council meeting, if there's any clarification that needs to be sought, that would be advantageous.
If I may, I must say I'm very surprised because we've been through an exhaustive process of that's been years in the making and workshops, and for it to come to this, I find absolutely, I'm gobsmacked.
Councillor Nash, I prefer you remove that comment. Thank you. It was unnecessary. I believe it's an adverse reflection on council. Will you please remove that comment? No? Anybody want to move an adverse reflection? Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Anybody second that? Thank you, Councillor Hammersley. Just give me a moment. From memories, we actually repeat the words that Councillor Nash said. Thank you, Councillor Jennings.
The end of the sentence was, I believe that it was deliberate. That's my recollection of the words.
I understand this was in reference to the fact that there wasn't a seconder to the motion. Would you agree with that, Councillor Nash?
Well, I'm just unclear as to whether there was sufficient time allowed for a seconder, because I almost within moments of me moving it, sorry, the words escape me, but it lapsed. So I'm very curious as to, having sat through the whole process of workshops and so forth myself, and seen the support that this has had. I'm not saying there might not be amendments or whatever, but I'm very, very surprised that that suddenly this has lapsed. And I'm just wondering if there was a glitch. We've had a few technical glitches today. Maybe this was just a time glitch, because it seemed with the lack of people that are here today. So I guess my comments stem from my disappointment.
Yes, Councillor Hammersley.
Given what's happening, I'd like to make a personal explanation. First of all, I observed the presiding member look at everybody at the table, including me, made eye contact. I was not willing to second the matter because I had an amendment to, a minor amendment, but an important amendment to propose. I was surprised that no one else seconded it too, but that's the consequence. And actually, the suggestion that this was orchestrated is outrageous. Had it been orchestrated, I would have been running around getting somebody orchestrating a seconder because I wanted to make an amendment. Now, it's just an unfortunate slip that's occurred, and what I hope is that the staff do have enough guidance from us. We've got a meeting a little bit earlier next month because we're bringing it, it's a week earlier than normal. But we know there's some pretty serious talking to be done with a couple of the major landowners, which we've heard nothing about yet. And I'm sure that the 3 weeks can be well used to get on with that very important task, because I'm actually not going to be at the next meeting, unfortunately, but I'm very interested to make sure that both of those landowners are heard, and not only heard by the staff but by the council. So that would be a great step forward before this thing comes back. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Look, I don't believe we can turn this into a general discussion. I think it's covered, but I just want to reconfirm that I did look up. I looked at everyone in the room, and I felt quite confident that I did give enough time for a seconder, and I actually had some notes to speak to the item, so I was too quite surprised, but that's the way it fell. I believe we were probably disadvantaged by only half of the council being here this evening. So we move on to a vote on the adverse reflection. Thank you. Councillor Nash, an adverse reflection was called upon you by the words that you said. It was moved by Councillor Jennings and seconded by Councillor Hammersley, and we are now voting on that adverse reflection. Thank you, Council. That has been carried 5-2.
Perhaps if I could just explain what happened for those, is that there was in relation to 4.6 of the meeting procedures, Council has passed a resolution that describes or records the words within the minutes. Sorry, 4.164. 4.164 B. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the clarity on the standing orders. We move on to agenda item 13. Thank you. That the meeting be closed to the... No, I'm sorry, we don't have a confidential item. So we move on to agenda item 14, closure of the meeting. I declare the City of Subiaco Ordinary Council meeting of the 21st of September 2021 closed at 7:09 p.m. Thank you, councillors, members of the gallery, thank you, staff, and members of the press for attending this evening.